What's going on, you guys? Welcome back to the Neighborhood Podcast. One of the hosts, my name is Kyle Dabra.
It's Kevin Valentin on this side. Kyle, week 2 is coming to a close. How you doing, bro?
I'm doing well, man. It was quite the day this past Sunday in week 2 of the NFL. I don't know about you, but dude, when it came to the picks that I made for my family pool, dude, it was a train wreck this past weekend. I mean, we had so many upsets, so many good teams get knocked off this past Sunday. It was just ridiculous. I mean, you had the Cowboys get smoked at home, you had the 49ers lose on the road to the Vikings, and then, I mean, you almost look at Houston last night on Sunday night, almost lose to Caleb Williams and the Bears. I mean, there were plenty of other matchups that we can talk about where, some good teams got knocked off, or there were some teams that almost got knocked off this past weekend. But overall, dude, you want to talk about just a chaotic weekend in the NFL. This definitely lived up to it for sure.
This was the one. Like you said, it was definitely upset Sunday. I'm usually not accustomed to seeing this many, like you said, but we got quite a packed agenda in a small window of time today. So let's just go right into it. Kyle, let me break down the agenda, and then we'll just go right into subject matter one.
Yep.
So, breaking news as of, I want to say, maybe a couple hours ago, starting quarterback for the Carolina Panthers, Bryce Young, former number 1 overall pick, has been benched for Andy Dalton in Carolina after his head coach in the postgame press conference reassured the media that Bryce was the quarterback of the future and that Bryce was his guy. The report was conflicting and also said that the owner of the Panthers, as well as the GM, was involved in that decision. So it's kind of a cluster of information of who really does run this team and what is the point of having a head coach if you're going to have the front office brass make a decision like that with such a young quarterback and his confidence. And then we're going to dive right into the slate of games. Kyle already said we had quite a bit of good ones. So we're going to go into the Chiefs and Bengals, the Burrow versus Mahomes matchup, where obviously Patrick Mahomes scrapes by thanks to an Evan McPherson missed extra point, and the Chiefs move on to 2-0, whereas Joe Burrow and Cincinnati move on to 0-2 for probably, I think, the second or third straight time in Joe Burrow's early career in Cincinnati. Then we're going to go into the blowout that Kyle alluded to. New Orleans stays hot, scores another 40 bomb in Dallas, in Jerry World. Cowboys look pretty bad offensively. It was questionable, but that defense, man, they let up 35 points at the half. So not a good look for what the Cowboys had invested in, especially in terms of Dak Jones, Dak Prescott's contract. Moving on to the next one, another big upset of the week. The Ravens lose to the Las Vegas Raiders due to a Daniel Carlson field goal to put him up with a few seconds left. And then I think that Justice Williams threw a forward pass in the lateral game after Lamar Jackson broke free for 30-plus yards. So it's kind of like what the hell is going on in there? What is John Harbaugh thinking? And can Baltimore bounce back with the slate that they have in front of them over the next 3 to 4 weeks? And then we're going to go into our final game, which is another upset that Kyle also mentioned. The 49ers go out and they lose to Brian Flores' defense and Sam Darnold of the Minnesota Vikings. Now, Justin Jefferson did leave that game with a quad injury. They list him as day-to-day. So for fantasy owners, including myself, that is a good sign. But in terms of the Minnesota Vikings, look like they are here to stay. And the San Francisco 49ers fall early on. So like we said, packed agenda. But let's just dive right into this. Kyle, you have had a young quarterback at the helm for the last 2 years or last couple years with Mac Jones, and now you have Drake May and maybe even Milton waiting in the background. So you know how pivotal these games are in these young quarterbacks' careers. Bryce Young had a full season under his belt last year. The Panthers obviously ended up not being very well or not being coached very well, let alone playing well. And now we are 2 weeks into the season, and we're making a drastic quarterback change. What are your thoughts on how Carolina is managing this situation and how Bryce Young is supposed to feel?
Well, I mean, it's very simple, Kev. Carolina is just an absolute train wreck. I mean, you go back to week 1, they got absolutely annihilated by the New Orleans Saints. Now, granted, they went on the road, and I think everybody looked at that game and pretty much assumed that Carolina was going to lose that game. But I don't think anybody saw them losing in the fashion that they did, losing by 37 points, 47-10 on the road. And then you follow it up this past weekend against the Chargers, and they scored 3 points. Now, when it comes to Carolina as a team, we all know that it's abysmal. This is a team that's going absolutely nowhere. The organization is completely dysfunctional. And now let's address the elephant in the room with Bryce Young getting benched, and now Andy Dalton's going to be the starting quarterback going into week 3. I don't think it really matters what sort of quarterback you put in that position. The Panthers have failed Bryce Young at this point. Now, I understand that Bryce Young has had his issues throughout his first 2 years in the NFL. When you look back to last year, only had 11 touchdowns to 10 interceptions. Obviously, it's rookie numbers. You would like to see some progression going into year 2. When you look at it right now, he has 0 touchdowns to 3 interceptions. And I mean, as a whole, Kev, they've scored 13 points offensively to start off the first 2 games of the year. You just can't have that. Now, I have a little bit of sympathy for Bryce, just based off the fact that I think the organization has failed him by not surrounding him with the necessary pieces to lead a functional offense. Like, this is not just this year. This was last year as well. And I think when it comes to the benching of Bryce Young, I can understand it, because when you only have 13 offensive points the entire 2-week stretch that they've had, and he's what, 0 touchdowns to 3 interceptions? Dude, in this last game, he had 84 yards passing. It's just not going to get it done. Now, hopefully, he gets another opportunity either in a couple weeks or later in the year to be able to redeem himself. But, I mean, when you talk about confidence, this has to be just an absolute gut punch. Now, hopefully, he could be able to kind of bounce back from this and take some lessons away from it, because I think at this point, just based off of how Carolina has played offensively, you might as well throw Andy Dalton in there just to see if they can get some sort of spark offensively. But I think at this point, it really doesn't matter who you're going to put in at that quarterback spot. They're going to get absolutely destroyed. You know, hopefully they get some better play from Andy Dalton. But I think when it comes to Carolina, there's a very real chance that they're going to lose 14 to 15 games this year. This team just doesn't have the pieces to be able to be competitive. And whether it's Bryce Young or Andy Dalton, I don't think it's really going to matter. Bryce Young got absolutely killed against the Saints in week 1 with the pass rush. And then you look at the Chargers game, I think it could have actually been even worse with the fact that they only scored 3 points. Now, granted, they lost by a smaller margin, but the Chargers dominated them in that game. So we'll see what happens with Bryce Young over the next couple weeks, but this just has to be a gut punch, dude. Hopefully he can get another chance to be able to redeem himself, but I don't really think he's the issue here. I think there's a systemic issue with Carolina, and they've got a long way to go to be able to reverse course here. So it's going to be a rough season for Carolina, not just the team as a whole, but it's going to be rough for Bryce as well.
Yeah, it's weird that you say I'm going to piggyback off of it. It's been dysfunctional in Carolina for some time now, and I will even go as far back to say the whole decision to bring Cam Newton back for a second run at trying to make something competitive was we're just peeling at straws or poking at straws, whatever the saying is. You were praying for some kind of resurgence. And then ever since then, it has been bad decision after bad decision after bad decision. You brought in Baker Mayfield, it didn't pan out. You brought in Sam Darnold, who started really well, and then obviously he ended up getting hurt. And then now you're talking about this situation with Bryce. What are you guys going to do? Like, when are you guys going to make a good decision via the front office? Everyone wants to blame the coach. Everyone wants to blame the players, blah, 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 blah. But when it comes to how you guys are going to be able to definitively move forward in this organization, it speaks volume, because you draft Bryce number 1 overall with no weapons and no offensive line. You go into year 2, you add a couple more weapons, you try to bolster up the offensive line, and it's not doing well.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Nothing is going to par. Nothing is owning up to, playing up to snuff. But then you bench the guy you've pretty much bet your future on. I mean, you guys decided to go after Bryce Young instead of CJ Stroud. Now, people want to sit here and say, oh, it's Frank Reich's fault, this, that, and the third, but I'm not going to go as far as to say that, because we all know that Josh McCown wanted him. I'm pretty sure the GM wanted him, but Frank and the owner wanted Bryce. That seems like a front office issue rather than a coaching problem. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to talk about this is the 3rd head coach that Bryce has had in 2 years?
No
what
continuity.
What do you want the man to do? That's 3 different systems.
Yeah.
It's going to take time And for you pulling him, that's going to stunt his growth. It's going to ruin his confidence. And we've seen what happens when you do that. Oh, I'm going to pull you this week. I'm going to throw you back in this week. And then Andy Dalton's going to come back for another 2. The quarterback carousel game in professional football has never been a thing that's going to work. A 2-system quarterback never works. So this is definitely not good for either the organization nor the franchise. And when I say franchise, I mean the franchise player and Bryce Young. And this is not going to be good for team morale. Everyone's frustrated. Doesn't mean you have to drastically make a change. And as I said in the lead up, before we started the actual segment, the head coach went to the podium and when asked, Bryce is my guy, was his response. He is our quarterback. This is not a good look for the Carolina Panthers. This is not a good look for Bryce's career. And like Kyle said, this is going to be a painful season to watch if you're a Carolina Panther fan, if there are any out there actively.
Well, and I'll make one final point because we were talking about this before we sat down. We were looking up the average ticket prices going into the next couple of games that the Panthers have on their slate. The next home game that they have, they're playing against the Bengals. The cheapest ticket that I can find was $40. Their next home game after that, they're playing the Falcons. It's $30. Kev, when the price points are that low for an
Not a good
NFL
sign.
football game, they're desperate to try to get people in. And truth be told, if it's only $30 and you're a fan of the opposing team that's coming into Carolina, you might as well go. If it's only $30 and you get decent seats, go for it. And the thing is, there's probably a very good chance that the opposing team going into Carolina is probably going to win, just based off of the fact that
They're playing
Carolina's
Carolina.
Carolina's going nowhere. I mean, people have been making jokes that the Panthers should be relegated out of the NFL at this point, just based off of how bad they've looked. So it's going to be an uphill battle for the Panthers the entire year. Hopefully they can get some wins underneath their belt to just get some sort of confidence going their way. But dude, I think it's going to be a mess this year when it comes to the Panthers. So I think Panthers fans already know that, but now it's actually playing itself out. It's going to be tough. Definitely going to be a tough year for the Panthers. But with that said, we are going to transition to one of the bright spots of this past weekend, and that was the renewed rivalry of Joe Burrow versus Patrick Mahomes. We had the Kansas City Chiefs go up against the Cincinnati Bengals, and this was a barn burner. Came right down to the last play of the game. The Chiefs were able to pull out a very tight win against the Bengals, winning by the score of 26-25. They won off of a game-winning field goal from Harrison Butker. Despite the fact that the Bengals lost this game, they definitely made improvements from their first loss of the year against the Patriots in week 1. Definitely looked like they got their rhythm offensively, but Kansas City, they stepped up when they needed to. They made the plays that needed to be made and got themselves in a position to win that game, albeit only by 1 point. But 2 weeks in, they're sitting at a 2-0 record. And unfortunately for the Bengals, once again, we've talked about this before. Now they're sitting at an 0-2 hole 2 weeks into September. Those early season woes continue for the Bengals. So, Kev, to kick this one to you, how would you look back at this matchup between the Chiefs and the Bengals and once again renewing the rivalry between Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow?
It's like I texted you. We were robbed of another thriller because McPherson missed the extra point. I saw this game going back and forth the entire way. It was touchdown after touchdown, one turnover after a turnover. It didn't make a difference. Both teams know each other well. Joe Burrow, everyone knows, is the only quarterback, at least within recency, that has been when I say recency, outside of Tom Brady retiring, that has been able to beat Patrick Mahomes at a consistent level. And now the overall matchup is getting a little tighter. Now it's becoming a little bit more even, and it's not like the great disparity that was Tom Brady versus Peyton Manning, where Tom far and away destroyed Peyton Manning in the overall head-to-head matchups. And I know Kyle loves that I bring that up for the history books. But when it comes to this, now this has become, I think Joe Burrow at one point was 3-1 against Patrick Mahomes in his career in terms of when he was healthy and actively playing. Now it's 3-2. The Bengals once again are 0-2, and the Chiefs are 2-0. Patrick Mahomes has 3 Super Bowls. Joe Burrow's only been to 1 and lost 1. But for the game, Joe played a great game. You can't put this on Joe Burrow. Mm-hmm. Joe Burrow was 23 of 36 for 258 and 2 touchdowns. And surprisingly enough, albeit he was pressured a lot, he was only sacked 3 times. Whereas when you look at Patrick Mahomes, he was sacked twice, but he had 2 interceptions. So the defense of both teams stepped up when they needed to, because obviously The rush defense for the Kansas City Chiefs was able to stuff and basically completely take out the Cincinnati Bengals rushing attack, as they were limited to only 74 yards. But then you talk about Pacheco and everything else, who actually left that game with a fractured fibula, right?
Yep. Yep.
He's going to be out for at least a month, month and a half, maybe even 2 months, depending on how that recovery goes. So the Cincinnati secondary played well enough to keep Patrick Mahomes under 200 yards and again force 2 turnovers. It just came down to, like Kyle said in the lead up, who was going to make plays when it mattered, who was going to step up and take over the game when it needed to. Rashid Rice was able to get open a few times. Pacheco was able to break off some big runs, and Kansas City was able to move the ball down the stretch. Cincinnati just fell short. Story of their lives. Kyle already said it. Early September, they just find ways to struggle. I'm not going to sit here and say it's full panic mode, but when you have Jamar Chase breaking down, having these tantrums, almost trying to get into it with a referee on the sideline, the run game has been very inefficient thus far for Cincinnati. It's just not a good look moving forward. Like I said, I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm panicking, but in terms of how the game went overall, definitely a good sign to see that this rivalry be rekindled. But the Chiefs have won both of these games thus far in the season by a total of 2 points. They're not the Kansas City Chiefs of old where they're blowing people out, but at the same time, their defense has definitely kept them in the game. Because I think the Ravens came down to, they scored the touchdown, but they didn't get the extra point of the 2 point conversion. Am I right?
No, Isaiah likely his foot was out of bounds.
Oh,
They
right,
they
right. I
I
forgot.
think they lost by was it 6 or 7?
I thought it was a 2 point conversion in my mind. I thought they scored and they went for two to win, and then
No,
that's where his play.
no. Isaiah likely caught it, but he stepped out
But
of
the
bounds.
foot, right.
Yeah, his toe
My
was out.
apologies. Basically, a total of what? 8 points in 2 games.
Yeah.
It's not an ideal situation, like I said. Nevertheless, it came down to a what if, because if Likely's toe was in, that game was over, or that
Baltimore
game
could
was
have.
going to OT.
Well, Baltimore was going for two. Like in that specific instance, they were down by one, and
But they were going to go for the win no matter
I
what.
vividly remember John Harbaugh was putting up the two sign after what was thought that Isaiah likely got that touchdown, but after review with his toe being out, the game ended right there. But no, you can continue.
No, yeah, but basically, Kansas City is not showing me that they are going to win convincingly this year. But as I told Kyle before we even started recording, I don't really worry about them because last year was the year they shouldn't have won, and they did. And they always find a way to turn it up when it matters the most in the postseason. So when it comes to KC, definitely not too worried. When it comes to Cincinnati, I would say that their panic meter is a little higher than Kansas City, considering they have no wins. But definitely an entertaining game for sure. And I look forward to hopefully another playoff matchup between these two teams.
Yeah, when I look back at this game, Kevin, I'm going to be honest with you. The Bengals should have won this game. They controlled the pace the entire game. I thought Joe Burrow played outstanding. He played composed. He didn't force the ball into dangerous situations, didn't turn the ball over, and they were able to consistently get drives up and down the field, and they really gave that KC defense trouble. But the thing that I always go back to, and it was the point that I mentioned, is that when KC needs the plays that need to be made, they execute. And when the really, like, this came down to one drive. The Bengals had a third down opportunity to be able to get a first down and essentially ice the game late in the fourth quarter. Spags brought a great blitz. I think it was a corner blitz, and they got Joe. And they had to punt the ball back, and it led Casey on that drive to set them up for the game-winning field goal. Now, when it comes to the Bengals, obviously being in an 0-2 hole, that hurts, especially when they played very inspired football compared to their week one. As far as I'm concerned, it was a dreadful loss that they had against New England in week one. This was a game that they probably should have won because Patrick Mahomes, truth be told, he should have had 3 interceptions. They had one called back on a defensive penalty.
Pass interference.
And you hold Patrick Mahomes to 151 yards passing, you take Kelsey entirely out of the game. That's a good formula if you're looking at it from Cincinnati's perspective.
Big time.
But the thing is that towards the end of the game, in the fourth quarter, Kansas City outscored Cincinnati 9-3. Since they only got 3 points on the board in the fourth quarter. When you look back at the 3 quarters prior to that, Casey had real trouble being able to get the Bengals from not moving the ball. the Bengals were moving the ball consistently. They were getting points, whether it was coming in the form of a touchdown or field goals. But at the end of the day, Patrick made the plays that needed to be made, and he set up Harrison Butker for that game-winning field goal. And just to kind of wrap this up, I'm going to piggyback off the point that you made. This is a beatable KC team this year. I understand we're only 2 weeks in, but this is a team that if you play solid defense against Pat, you're able to lock down his targets in either Rashee Rice, Travis Kelce, and Xavier Worthy. This team can be beat. The Ravens damn near beat them, and the Ravens I mean, they have their own issues to contend with, and they almost beat KC. So when it comes to KC, I think they have issues that need to be addressed, and hopefully they can kind of remedy those situations going into October. When it comes to the Bengals, they made a step in the right direction as far as I'm concerned. They're making progress. Now they just have to get a win. They get that first win on the board. I think that will kind of set them in motion. There were some self-inflicted issues that they have to deal with. Obviously, Jamar Chase didn't help out that situation with getting unsportsmanlike conduct in that one play where he thought it was a hip drop tackle. And unfortunately for them, granted, they were able to get 3 points out of it, but there was a situation where they could have potentially put up a touchdown on the board. But Jamar didn't help out that situation. So overall, I thought this was a really compelling game. It would have been great to see this go into overtime had McPherson got that extra point earlier before Harrison Butker got that game-winning field goal. But nonetheless, I think this is a great rivalry. Joe played outstanding, but Patrick made the plays that needed to be made right at the end, and that's the difference. You talk about the Bengals losing by 1 point. That's a tough one. And you could definitely tell that the team was definitely down in the dumps, for lack of a better phrase, after basically playing as well as you can on the road in Arrowhead against the Chiefs. So we'll see what happens with the Bengals and the Chiefs moving forward. But overall, I thought it was a very compelling game, and we'll see how both teams adjust going into week 3.
100%. And that's going to move us into the next slate, right? It's going to be the, surprisingly, New Orleans Saints blowing out the Dallas Cowboys on their home field. New Orleans has scored over 40 in the last 2 weeks, and Dallas was thought to be back, as they always are, according to Cowboys fans, especially early in September, by beating a great Cleveland defense after Dak gets his payday. This is how they respond. I'm making weird faces because it's like fans really do it to themselves. The team really does it to themselves. So it's like, I'm not surprised. But in this manner, kind of am, especially by the team that they played against. So, Kyle, I'll just kick it right to you. What the hell's happening in Dallas? And are you surprised with how good New Orleans has been playing this season?
I'll start with Dallas first, because I think this was unexpected, to say the least. You know, it's one thing if the game was competitive and they lose a tough one at home by maybe a possession. That'd be one thing. But they lost by 25 points in this game. I mean, this was a runaway game for New Orleans. And truth be told, Kev, it really didn't matter how you slice or dice it when it comes to the Cowboys. This defense got absolutely torched. Whether it was on the run game, whether it was in the passing game, they had no answer for what New Orleans was throwing their way. Alvin Kamara, 3 rushing touchdowns. He also had a receiving touchdown as well. 4 total touchdowns from Alvin Kamara. This reminds me of Alvin Kamara just a couple years ago when he was racking up numbers like this. I mean, Alvin is starting to get up there in age compared to what you would see from a typical running back. But putting up numbers like this, he had what I would consider is a career day, or damn near a career day, with how effective he was against this Dallas defense. And on top of that, Derek Carr. The one thing that I've seen with Derek Carr in the first 2 weeks is his connection with Rashid Shaheed. This deep ball game that New Orleans has under the new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak, man, this thing is a thing of beauty as far as I'm concerned. He is hitting up these long distance throws with Shaheed. And not only are they connecting, they are getting touchdowns off of this, because they got one against Carolina in week 1. And when you beat the safeties up top and you connect for like a 50, 60, 70-yard bomb, you might as well stick with it at that point. And it really didn't matter what Dallas lined up defensively against New Orleans. They just had no answers. So when it comes to the offense, you really have to give a lot of credit to Kubiak the new offensive coordinator for the Saints, he has really put into motion a solid offense here. Kev, it was like you said in the lead up. When you drop 40 bombs in back-to-back games, you scored 91 points in the first 2 weeks of the year. That is really, really impressive. I mean, even Tom Brady was talking about it pregame before this game took place. And he basically said, when you put up 40 plus against any team in the NFL, that is respectful to say the least. Like, that is something really to behold. So when it comes to just the Cowboys, this was just an abomination as far as I'm concerned. And the thing is, when you look at Dak and the Cowboys offense, they had no response. Granted, they were able to make it somewhat competitive in the second quarter. But when you have the Saints offense go out there and drop 35 points in the first half, it's a runaway at that point. And Dak did not have the best game. They turned the ball over a couple times. That Saints defense was flying around. And pretty much as far as I see it, once the Saints got ahead, it was pretty much just an avalanche. It just kind of snowballed and it just got out of control for Dallas. So overall, when I look at this game in totality, it was a beatdown. New Orleans did exactly what they needed to do. They executed their game plan, as far as I'm concerned, to perfection. When you drop 44 points on the road in Jerry World, that is something to behold. But I will say this, when it comes to Cowboys fans, I don't think it's necessarily the end of the world. We're only in week 2. The team will make adjustments. Obviously, this is something that if we see more of this happen where Dallas is giving up 30, 35 points defensively, then we may have to come back to this discussion at a later date. But overall, great game from New Orleans. And Dallas got kicked in the teeth. There's no other way to put it. So Dallas is going to have to make some major adjustments here. And when it comes to New Orleans, Kev, I'll flat out say it. They're a top 5 team in the NFL right now. I was talking to some kid in our comments last week, and I made the mention, if New Orleans went into Dallas and they won on the road in week 2, that's a statement. Not only did they do that, they probably made the biggest statement this past weekend by beating them down that badly. So as far as I see it, New Orleans is a top 5 team, and it is well-deserved. And Kev, I'll even go one step further, just based off of the first 2 weeks in the NFL. This is the best performing team so far in the first 2 weeks.
Without a doubt. And the most surprising.
Yeah. 47 and then 44. I mean, when you're dropping points like that, it's deserved. They deserve respect for that, and they've earned it. So good for the Saints. We'll see if they can continue it. And Dallas, they got to regroup. It's that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to kind of plug into that other than 2 things: coaching and offensive scheme. When you talk about what it is that Dallas wanted to bring back this season, right? Everybody wanted Mike McCarthy gone. Everybody knew that Mike McCarthy was known for his offensive mindset and how he called games when he was a coach in Green Bay when they won the Super Bowl. And obviously, Dak Prescott was an MVP candidate last year. But Jerry Jones failed to do what he needed to do as an owner and as a GM, because clearly he can't separate the 2 things. And he didn't bring any talent into the backfield. You re-signed Ezekiel Elliott, who was well past his prime. You didn't bring any additional running backs to add depth to that running back room, and it shows. You went and you had 68 total rushing yards against this team. Albeit you were getting blown out pretty early, so you had to abandon the run. But early on, when you're not able to move the ball past the sticks, past 2 to 3 yards a carry, you have to get away from it, because then you have to put the ball in Dak's hands. And Dak ended up having 2 interceptions as well. And what I mean by coaching, you let Dan Quinn go to Washington, which could be a good thing, could be a bad thing. Obviously, Jaden Daniels gets his first win, albeit once again it's against the New York Giants, which isn't saying much, but he got his first win as a head coach, at least recently, because he was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons after that New England debacle in the Super Bowl. So what I'm getting at is, you brought in Mike Zimmer, and you thought Mike Zimmer was going to do something, because all the Cowboys fans and all the Cowboys analysts and beat writers were like, Mike Zimmer's defense is electric. Did you see what it did to Deshaun Watson? Did you see how they disguised those blitz packages? Did you see how they were able to run at the quarterback and get to the football like a bunch of ball hawks? What the hell is your excuse now? 44 at home. You have 2 of the better corners in the league in Diggs and Bland. You have one of the better elite pass rushers in Parsons. And this defense was one of the better ones last year, outside of that playoff mishap or playoff destruction against the Green Bay Packers. And they were stronger this year because Diggs is back. And you will allow 44 again. Your last 2 home games, you've allowed almost 90 points if not over 90 points. With two different coordinators, on what world are we going to start to hold people accountable? You didn't want to fire McCarthy. You let Dan Quinn go. You replaced him with Zimmerman, and then you didn't hire Belichick or any other veteran head coach that could have found a way to turn around this organization. That starts with Jerry, and it ends with Jerry. You want to have your own private interview after every game? The only owner in the NFL that does that? Fine. You want to pay Dak Prescott, who's won 2 freaking playoff games in the last 8 years, $60 million? Fine. You don't want to make any free agent acquisitions and then wonder why your team is struggling? Fine. But I do not want to hear from Jerry Jones that we are all in ever again, because he has had a multitude of opportunities over Dak Prescott's career to make significant change, and he hasn't. This is why this franchise will be mediocre up until my kids probably pass away, because this is just a joke.
Mhm.
Dallas needs to chill out, figure it out, or Jerry has to take a step down. You don't go pay someone $60 million to go get your ass whooped by damn 25 points at home in week 2 of the NFL season. So, like I said, I don't have much to say on it because, truth be told, when I saw it, I kind of smirked because I was just like, Dallas fans do it to themselves. They're like Met fans. Every beginning of every season, this is our year. Going to the bowl this year. Sit down and welcome back to reality. New Orleans just dropped one on your head.
And I will say, just one final point about the Cowboys. They're going up against the Ravens next week, which is, there's no easy game for them. Just kind of give me the scenario that you see with them playing the Ravens next week, going up against Lamar Jackson.
Well, I don't know, because that's actually our next topic of just the Ravens in general. They look terrible themselves, but when you talk about Baltimore, their offensive line has had their own frame of issues. Their offensive play has also been in question. So, two franchises right now struggling to find their identities. I would like to give Dallas an edge because they do have a win against one of their own divisional opponents in terms of against the Ravens, because the Browns' defense is nothing to cough at or golf at. But I don't know, man. I feel like that's going to be a close game. I think that it is going to be a wake up or go to sleep kind of game. Like, both teams have to make a statement early on because their schedules don't get any easier. So it's kind of a perfect segue into the next game, which is, like I just said, the Ravens. Oh, you got it? Okay, take it.
I got, I got this one. Yeah, this was quite the surprise. Uh, I'm saying it's a surprise because basically it looked like the Ravens were going to win this game, but the Raiders go on the road and shock the Baltimore Ravens, putting them in an 0-2 hole to start the year, winning by the score of 26-23. And Kev, when we look at the state of the Ravens at this point, you look back to week 1, they were literally a toe away from being in a situation where they were going to potentially go for a 2-point conversion to win on the road in Arrowhead. You follow that up, you have your home opener. You're up throughout most of the game, and you let the game slip in the fourth quarter. It being 0-2 to start the year is quite. If you're a Ravens fan, you're probably a little bit depressed based off of the fact that this is not the way that you potentially saw the season starting out. Granted, it's still early; they have time to recover, but 0-2 to start the year, not ideal. So, Kev, to kick this one to you, with the Ravens losing at home to the Raiders this past weekend, is it time to panic in Baltimore now that they've started 0-2 to start the year?
The only reason I would say that their panic meter is higher is because of the schedule that Baltimore has to go through over the next few weeks. And I'll give you guys a little bit of an insight, because it's not going to get easy or easier until the brief break in October. Their next 3 games are at Dallas, at home against Buffalo, and then at Cincinnati. That is a tough 3-week stretch, guys. And then that game that I told you about that is going to be that little break in between is against the Commanders. And I'm not going to sit here and say the Commanders are a great team, but it's a rookie quarterback in a new offense with a new defensive coordinator or a defensive-minded head coach in Dan Quinn. You never know what's going to happen in a game like that. But anyway, that should be their break. When it comes to this game as a whole, it was kind of a snooze fest early on, if I remember correctly, because I was watching a little bit of it at work, and it ended up at halftime being 9-6. A lot of field goals, a lot of opportunities that were missed, a lot of 3-and-outs. But as my former quarterback, Gardner Minshew didn't look half bad. He only had 8 incompletions. He's not someone that's going to go out there and kill you for 1,000 yards in the air, but 276 is not that bad. A touchdown and an interception, but Devontae Adams finally got into a groove. Devontae Adams had over 100 yards receiving, but again, for whatever reason, a lot of these NFL teams refuse to run the football, and they refuse to do it whenever they do decide. The Raiders only had 27 yards rushing. That is abysmal. They look like Colorado. Shout out to Dion for getting a win against Colorado State this week. But, dude, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know how Baltimore did this. I actually saw a stat on the TV right before Carlson kicked that field goal. The Ravens, since I think Lamar has been on this roster or has been the starting quarterback, now that they actually officially lost the game, this would be their 11th game that they were up by 7+ points that they ended up losing in the fourth quarter. That's all coaching. That is 100% all John Harbaugh. That is execution. That is play calling. That is defensive assignments. Everything you can think of when you talk about the umbrella of a coaching tree, they fail on all aspects. And then you talk about Justin Tucker completely falling off a cliff. I think he's 1-7 in his last 50-yard field goal attempts. We were talking about him or regarding to him as the greatest kicker of all time, and to his respect, he still is because of all the records that he holds. But right now, I wouldn't trust him to hit the front side of a barn if I had to kick 50+ yards because of how inconsistent he's been. The offensive line has been horrible. So as a whole, Baltimore choked this away. Yes. But the Raiders came to play. Antonio Pierce rallied these boys. Gardner Minshew kept these boys in it. Max Crosby had a moment after Minshew threw that interception, pulled him off to the side and was like, dude, we got you. We following you. You're our guy. And that superseded to continue into a win. So shout out to Vegas for not giving up and rolling over and saying they're a better team. It is what it is. But Baltimore's got to get it together, man, because these next 3 weeks, truth be told, they could end up realistically going 0-5. I could physically see it happening because of how good the teams are on the slate. Cincinnati's 0-2. They're not gonna sleep, and that's a divisional game. Dallas is gonna be ticked off next week that they freaking lost by 25 points. And then you talk about Buffalo, who's on a roll right now, and Josh Allen is playing probably one of the best season of his career, as well as James Cook. Dude, the Ravens are in trouble. I'm not gonna sit here and say it's like a 9 or anything because it's still week 2, but I would say they have the highest panic meter because of the strength of schedule.
And not only that, Kev, I mean, when we look back to that week 1 matchup against the Chiefs, what was the one thing that stood out about the ineffectiveness of the offense? It had to do with the offensive line. You saw Lamar Jackson just running around, trying to evade pass rushers the entire game. And I think when it comes to the situation in this game, granted, he only got sacked twice in this game. But one of the things that's going to be a focal point for the Ravens, especially offensively this year, is can Lamar Jackson be able to move the ball down the field and be protected with the offensive line talent that he has around him? We're 2 weeks in. They're sitting at an 0-2 record. That's not ideal. And then on top of that, when you look at the team as a whole, 11 penalties, Kev. The Raiders. And the Raiders have been one of the most consistently penalized teams in the NFL over pretty much my entire lifetime. They only had 3. So you almost quadrupled the amount of penalties that you have against you compared to the opposing team that's coming into your building. This is your home opener. And one of the things that's going to be very interesting to see about the Ravens moving forward is you brought in Derrick Henry. You obviously brought him in to stabilize that run game. And so far at this point, he's been okay. In week 1, really wasn't effective. He was a little bit more effective against the Raiders in week 2. But we haven't seen Derrick Henry really pop off yet like he did in all those years when he was a member of the Tennessee Titans. And, when it comes to the overall panic meter of the Ravens, I think one of the things that we have to look at is whether or not that they could be able to get rhythm early, because I think they're going to have to score a lot of points just based off the fact that their defense may not hold up, and Lamar may be in a situation where he feels pressured to really kind of lead this team to the promised land, just based off the fact that there are some holes on this team. Offensively, it's the offensive line, and defensively, you just can't give up the game in the fourth quarter when you guys have a lead. And unfortunately, in their case, they fell short in that regard, and now they're sitting 0-2. So overall, I would say the Ravens are in a little bit of trouble. I don't think it's, the time to panic yet. we'll get through the month of September and we'll see how it goes from there. But they're kind of in a similar situation that the Bengals are in. 0-2 to start off the year, not ideal. They have promise, but they just have to be able to execute, and they have to limit those penalties. They have to limit that. If they do that, they'll be better. But when you have 11 penalties compared to 3 against the other team, it's not ideal. So overall, I would say that the Ravens they got an uphill battle this year. This is one of those years where I think it's going to be an up and down year if they can't nail down the consistency on the offensive side of the ball. And I think it's going to put that team in a position where that defense is going to get tired and they're going to allow points, especially in the second half of these games.
Big time. Shout out Brock Bowers, too. Great game for the rookie tight end.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yep. But with that said, we are going to go into our final game of discussion, and that is going to be the Minnesota Vikings upsetting the San Francisco 49ers by the score of 23-17. This result was quite shocking just because 49ers looked very good against the Jets in week 1. A lot of people thought that would carry over going into week 2, but the Vikings, they step up, led by Sam Darnold and the defense of the Vikings, holding San Francisco to 17 points overall. The Vikings are sitting at 2-0. I don't think a lot of people really penned them in as a team that would be 2-0 at this point, but this is one of the most impressive wins that I've seen at this point early on in the season. And shout out to Sam Darnold going up against his former team, leading the way with the Vikings and getting a huge win at home. And, not only that, you saw Justin Jefferson have a really nice play of a 97-yard touchdown. It was a beautiful ball from Sam Darnold. But the only downside about this Vikings win was Justin Jefferson did go out with a quad injury. We don't really know his status moving forward. We'll obviously get more updates throughout the week.
But he was day-to-day, I think.
But he seemed like things were going to be okay. So this doesn't seem like it's going to be any sort of issue where he may be out for an extended period of time. But great win for the Vikings. So, Kev, to kick this one to you, just how impressive was this win that the Vikings picked up against the 49ers, and now they're currently sitting at a 2-0 record after week 2?
I'm just going to put it out there. This is a statement game. This is right under there from the Saints game. And the only reason I say underneath is because at the end of the day, the Saints did blow out the Dallas Cowboys. This is a defending NFC champions. Everybody's here except for Christian McCaffrey. And his replacement, Jordan Mason, he ain't do half bad, averaging 5 yards a carry with 100 yards and a touchdown. So you can't really go out there and say they're missing all their pieces. So Minnesota coming out here, defending home court advantage, or home field advantage, should I say? Wrong sport. Sam Darnold put a statement out there, and he said, this is why I needed somebody competent. This is why I needed somebody that can leverage me with the skill set, with a good team around him. Because if you remember correctly, coming out of USC, he was poised, he was accurate, he had a good arm, and he was great in the locker room. That's what everybody said. Where did he end up going? To the dysfunctional-ass New York Jets and the New York media. Seeing ghosts against New England, going to Carolina, falling apart in Carolina, going to San Francisco last year, learning under Shanahan, following Brock Purdy, I think he ended up playing what? Not a game. I think he played one game because somebody was hurt.
I think he got some time in with the 49ers. It may have been at the end of last year, but my memory is kind of shaky on that one.
But the point is, he got to put his tutelage, his education on display during a game because he got PT, like some kind of playing time, because he showed, I'm not half bad if you give me talent. Then you go to Minnesota and you're surrounded by Justin Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Ty Chandler's having a great year, and this defense led by Brian Flores with an offensive-minded head coach like Kevin O'Connell. How could you fail? You have the best wide receiver in football by your side. It's like, finally, I've been given opportunities, but I've been given, and now he gets the opportunity to play alongside a receiver like him with a head coach like that, and they're taking advantage of the situation. Shout out to the Minnesota Vikings organization for going out and getting this DC in Brian Flores, who Kyle knows very well is probably one of the best defensive coordinators in football. Another student of the game behind Bill Belichick. Everywhere he's gone, he's found success. Whether that is as the head coach of the Miami Dolphins, the linebackers coach in Pittsburgh last season, and now the DC of the Minnesota Vikings. Super happy for him. Could not be more happy. But to go out there and put Brock Purdy on skates like that with 6 sacks, to force that turnover, and to win a close game at home, because you go out there and you were behind in that fourth quarter, or no, excuse me, you were up in the fourth, and you had a little bit of a slip. Minnesota, San Francisco's coming back, and defense held up where it needed to hold up.
Hmm.
So shout out to Minnesota. They played well. Sam Darnold again is showing people I was the number 3 overall pick back then in 2000 what 17,
I could look it
18?
up. I could look it up.
But he was behind Baker Mayfield. And you go out and you say I was worth that pick. I've just been in some pretty bad situations. Is basically what I'm trying to say. But Minnesota went and made to me a huge upset.
He was third.
He was 3.
Yep.
Okay. So my memory it's not failing me yet in my 30s. So no, great game by Minnesota. I wouldn't say it's a time to panic at all in San Fran. Again, it was a close game. Minnesota had a hot feeling, and then Justin Jefferson going out was their opportunity to go out there and try to capitalize, but they were not able to. But it was not a bad game by this team, aside from the offensive line having some woes and some small issues that they can correct. I would say that the San Francisco 49ers definitely played a tough one, but shout out to Minnesota.
Yeah, and really just one final point that I'll make about the Vikings win over the 49ers here. Extremely impressive win, but I really think that this win, you have to give a lot of credit to Sam Darnold to be able to step up to the moment and beat his former team, playing at a pretty high level and showing, at least from the Vikings organization, the possibility of where this team can go, even though despite the fact that he's the backup and the Vikings were faced with a pretty tough situation going into the year, but he's been able to at least stabilize some of the worries of the team after all the injuries that they had before the season even started. But really, this win, I think, is based off of the fact that Brian Flores had a great defensive scheme lined up against Brock Purdy. And Brock Purdy even acknowledged it after the game, where he basically said, and I quote, like, your guys' scheme is crazy. So obviously, that defensive scheme from Brian Flores got under Brock Purdy's skin, and it definitely affected him, despite the fact that Brock statistically had a decent game.
Really
But,
good game, yeah.
you hold that 49ers offense to 17 points. That is a pretty solid outing if you're looking at it from the defensive coordinator perspective of Brian Flores. So a great win for the Vikings. They're in a good situation being 2-0 to start the year. Granted, it's still early. We'll see whether or not that they continue the consistency here. But overall, this was probably one of the most shocking wins that we saw from this past weekend. It was really emblematic of week 2 as a whole. Really, like, this game in particular was like a microcosm of week 2 with all the teams that we saw who are high-flying teams get knocked off in week 2. So great win for the Vikings. And when it comes to the 49ers, they let this one slip by, but I think they'll be able to bounce back relatively quickly. The 49ers are just that good.
They'll definitely be fine. You guys got to remember, he was only here to be a bridge quarterback, but J.J. McCarthy was probably going to take that job at some point.
Yeah.
J.J. going down showed, give me some weapons. And Sam Darnold was building a case for next free agency. I can go and help a franchise. I'm not saying that he should go back to Carolina or anything like that because they're doomed. But Sam Darnold was making a great business case for him to kind of show in his portfolio or his resume to say, listen, I knew I was only here for 1 year. I knew I was only here to help out a rookie. But this is what happens when you give me the tools to be successful. And I think that he has been very, very much slept on.
And he's only 27. He's still young. So, if he can make the most of this opportunity, I think it's definitely going to serve him well in the long run. The main thing with him is he just has to keep that consistent level of play.
Yep.
And if he's able to do that, I think it's going to set him up pretty solid after this year if the Vikings decide to go to J.J. McCarthy once he recovers from his injury. So there's definitely an opportunity for Sam Darnold to take advantage of here. And we'll see how it plays out, not only for him, but for the Vikings as a whole throughout the rest of September and then going into October as well.
Yeah. But guys, that wraps it up for this week's episode. We're obviously going to put out some shorts throughout the week like we have. Thank you for the crazy success that we had. I mean, this weekend we had some, I wouldn't say record breaking because we had some crazy times a couple years back, but an incredible weekend nonetheless via views and follows and subscribers. So fantastic. I'm happy we're able to put out content for you guys that you like. I know Kyle's enjoying it. Our hard work, the fruits of our labor are actually becoming, we're getting some results, and it's a great feeling. Little bit at a time. We just came back. We're still a little rusty. We're trying to get the schedule ironed out, but consistency is key, like we always say. And as long as you guys are enjoying it, that's all that matters.
Yeah, and just to reiterate what Kev said, we just appreciate the support in what form it comes in. whether it's on YouTube or if it's on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. We just appreciate you guys supporting our content, tuning in, giving us feedback. We always appreciate that. And like Kev said, we'll have the episode drop. Obviously, we have the Eagles and Falcons game tonight. Obviously, you guys will know the result of it by the time that this episode is released, which should be released on Tuesday morning. But we'll try to keep you guys updated throughout the week. Like Kev said, we'll put out shorts, we'll put some content throughout the week, and we'll just kind of play it by ear. Hopefully, we get to sit down next week, kind of recap what's going on with week 3. If we get a chance to record any sort of previews for week 3, we will let you guys know. You guys will see uploads on YouTube and on Twitter of the sorts. But outside of that, we just appreciate you guys tuning in, and we hope that support continues throughout the rest of the season.
All right. Well, guys, thank you for everything, like we said, and we'll see you guys again later on.
Take it easy, you guys.